Oh, we got a good crowd here we got a good sample size. Let's get into it, everybody. I want to welcome you guys. We'll start with a little intro, kick things off, and then we will get into what you guys are all here for. Talking sample size, answering that mysterious question: how many people do I need to recruit for this study? The one that eludes all of us, but hopefully not after this workshop. Real quick, just give me a thumbs up or a yes, affirmative, something loud and clear in the chat if you can hear me, and see my screen. As usual, not so important if you can see me, but if you can hear me and see my screen, you'll be able to get everything you need out of this workshop. Yes, good. Awesome. Let me know if at any point I cut out or I mute myself or anything like that. I got the chat open, got my tabs organized, so I'm keeping an eye on it. Awesome. Looks like we're loud and clear. Sweet. So let's get started. I'm Joe. I'm going to be your instructor, guide, sample size guru today. Not really. And I'm the design advocate here at Lyssna. And my goal with workshops or any of the other things that I'm hosting or creating for Lyssna is to help you guys, researchers, product designers, listening users, do more effective research and feel confident in the day-to-day work that you're doing. Leave here an hour later feeling more confident, hopefully much more confident, to choose the right sample size and make confident decisions and good product decisions. So I've worked on projects of all shapes and sizes. These sample size questions have come up just about every time in just about every workshop or other client company that I've worked with. So I'm going to bring some of that experience into some of these examples. And of course, I want to hear from you guys. The chat is open. You guys are welcome to ask some questions in there, chime in with your own experience as we go through this, and we'll keep it rooted in take it out of the theory and keep it rooted in the day-to-day work, the needs, and the skills and confidence that you'll be able to put into practice tomorrow or right after this. My goal is for you to leave here, again, not just with more knowledge or mathematical formulas to calculate sample size. I hope that, we don't have much of that in here, but that's a good thing. My goal is for you to leave here feeling more confident about this skill and applying it to your own research that you're running. So at the end of the workshop, my kind of way to gauge how I did, is to ask you these two questions, see if you enjoyed the workshop, if an hour talking about sample size was a good use of your time, and two, do you feel more confident in this topic, not just knowing more, but feeling able to put it into practice in your own work. So don't answer that now. We'll check in at the end and hopefully see some thumbs up in the chat. And if not, I've got a feedback survey on the workshop where you can put all that constructive criticism or recommendations, because I read that too, of course. I read that first, actually. Let's get into our topic for today. Sample size basic. Let's start with just the overview of what we're talking about here, and then get into some of the specifics, some of the it depends stuff, some of the scenarios and additional factors, let's say, that we're going to bring into play when choosing a sample size and figuring out how many people we need to ask to get a confident answer to our question. Maine is still tuned in. Love it. Okay, so let's start with the basics of the basics. Sample size, as we're talking about it here in this context, in product research, UX research, sample size is pretty simply the number of participants in your study, how many people you are recruiting for a survey, for an interview, a preference test, a usability study. So main and most important thing, how many participants are we including? Then we get to a less simple, less straightforward question here. How do we choose the right sample size? So this is what we're going to be answering and talking about over the course of this workshop. And it is definitely one of the questions, like one of the most common questions that I'm asked in any type of research workshop. And I always have really just the most unsatisfying answer for it, which is it depends. And I know that's unsatisfying because I've been on the other side of asking that question, and you want a number. you want a quick answer. And we're going to go through that, and I'm going to show you a really awesome tool that we just built here at Lyssna to give you that satisfying answer. But one of the reasons that's challenging is because it does depend on a lot of different factors. It depends on the scenario, the product, the timelines, budgets, all of these different things that come into play outside of just math or statistical significance. So a simple question with a not so simple answer, but we're going to break it down and give you a simple, straightforward, actionable answer in this. As I said, as you probably already know, the answer to that question, the short answer, the one-liner is it depends, right? And I'm going to share this study. I actually haven't looked at it today yet. I saw some responses in it yesterday as I was trying to increase the sample size for it. Let me share this with you guys too. So this is a study that I created, the one that I was just talking about, that I distributed to some researchers, product designers, some people here at Lyssna. Some of you guys, participants here, probably did it as well. Let's see if this works. And it gives a couple scenarios, light scenarios, and pretty much asks how many participants, what would your sample size be? So for this first one, you're testing 2 headline variations on a landing page to see which resonates more with your target audience. What is the minimum number of participants in your target audience that you would recruit to feel confident acting on the results? And you can see here, all right, we got 33 participants, so pretty good. We've got a variety, and of course, we've got a couple people who answered, it depends. I had to throw that in there. And for each of these questions and scenarios, I asked that kind of more straightforward question: how many people would you feel confident in recruiting? What would your minimum sample size be? But I also added an additional question under this. What are some of the factors that would influence that answer? And I'm not going to go through all of these, but we got some really great responses. I am going to go through all these after the workshop, but for the sake of time, I can highlight the main theme, which is a lot of other factors, things like stakeholder requirements, things like timelines, budget, things that have nothing really to do with the actual math or statistical significance behind the number of participants, more about other factors that are considered in the real life, day-to-day work of a product designer or a researcher. I've got a couple more scenarios here. This one is about an onboarding experience. You're testing an onboarding flow to identify usability issues. We can see a lower total here, or like average, which is in line with something we'll talk about. And again, some more varied answers. Again, reinforcing this theme that when coming up with a sample size for a study, even in these kind of high level, like imaginary examples, that there are many different factors that go into it. And this was also how I designed this study, with these light examples, to further emphasize or pull out those insights that it depends, right? It's off of a basic little wireframe scenario here, not super easy to answer it. But some really interesting stuff in here. And I would say the theme is that it depends, right? There are a lot of different factors in that one. And if you want to see those results, I put it in the chat. You can check it out and deep dive those. If you have any questions on them, let me know. The point is, a lot of different things factor into choosing a sample size, and more importantly, choosing a sample size that you feel confident acting on, making product decisions based on. So we're going to cover some of that stuff. Now, zooming out a little bit, we have probably the best way, trying to get more into, let's say, concrete numbers here, right? The best way, or kind of first line of separation, is what type of study are we running? What kind of research are we doing? And qualitative versus quantitative is going to be at the top of the list of factors in determining sample size. Let me pull the chat up just so I can make sure we're all good here. Cool. Thanks, Stephanie. So if we're launching a research study, we're trying to figure out how many people we need in our participant pool, what our sample size is. First line of defense, let's say, is thinking about whether it or deciding whether we're doing it recruiting for a qualitative study or quantitative. So let's start with qualitative research. Qualitative research is broadly about discovering patterns, right? So some examples: a usability test or study to uncover onboarding friction, interviews to better understand the common pain points for our persona of restaurant owners, testing messaging or copy to understand what resonates with people who are starting their fitness journey. We're creating an app like that. These are pretty broad examples here, but the idea is that we're looking for patterns. In a usability test, we're seeing where people are frequently stumbling, frequently confused, hitting a speed bump in the process. In interviews, we're looking for patterns of themes, motivations, challenges, pain points, experiences. In maybe something like messaging, understanding how copy or language themes or patterns in how people interpret or quickly say internalize or interpret the language that's on the page. All of these are about trying to discover patterns. And as we know, there are tons of different qualitative methods and ways that we can do this, but in broad terms, it all comes down to the same thing: figuring out patterns that are going to lead us to draw larger insights and make product decisions based on. So qualitative confidence comes from seeing these patterns repeated, right? So confidence grows when we see the same issue appear across users, where we see people stumbling at the same point in an onboarding process that we're testing. And we also see this chart, which there are a million different versions of, that new sessions can stop revealing new insights, right? So when we're looking at a qualitative study and trying to find those patterns, let's say use our onboarding example, we're going to have a point where we're seeing a pattern of similar behavior, or let's say confusion at a certain point in the onboarding process. That's what we're looking for to gain confidence. That is something we want to, that's significant, right? And something that could apply to a broader population. And on the other side, there's a point of diminishing returns, right? So where we can test it with 10 people, start to see those patterns, and really have nothing. If we test it then with 100 more people, really see nothing new revealed there. So a top end to qualitative confidence. But again, main thing here, all about pattern repetition. Whatever the study type, whatever the method, whatever the product that you're working on, the idea here is you're building confidence in these through seeing them over and over again. Now, for a qualitative study, this is a loose range, but let's say 5 to 15 participants per segment, which we'll see is different than quantitative. A lower number of participants is required in general to start to see those themes and patterns develop and start to develop confidence that those patterns could apply to a wider group or your entire user base, even just seeing them with a small sample size. Quantitative research, on the other side, is about measuring magnitude, numbers, math. What percentage of users were able to complete this task? Which version drives more conversions or clicks? What's the average satisfaction score? These are things that are measured. We're not looking as much for pattern repetition. We're looking for statistical significance. So in a typical range for a quantitative study, and again, we'll get more into the specifics of this, it's going to be broadly going to require more participants to gain that confidence than a qualitative study. 50 plus participants, 200 plus participants for a 5% margin of error. So depending on, when we look at the calculator, we'll talk about this more, but depending on how confident you want to be in that decision with a quantitative study, that number of, or that minimum sample size, let's say, can really go up. More to uncover here, but the idea is qualitative and quantitative, the first separator, let's say, or first fork in the road when defining sample size. Qualitative, all about discovering patterns. You don't need generally as many people to do that. Quantitative, about establishing significance and statistical significance, and in general, and measuring it, you do need more participants to get to that, although there's some variation there as well. Okay, so if you're sitting here 20 minutes in saying, cool theory, Joe, I'm still wondering how many people do I actually need for this preference test that I'm trying to get up and running? I still haven't got a number yet. I've got ranges, I've got background, I've got examples, but I don't have a concrete number. How many people do I need to launch this to? Let's get into that. Before we talk about the nuance and some of the levers and adjustments you can make, let's get some hard numbers for this. So I want to share with you an amazing tool. I'm going to put this in the chat here. This is our sample size calculator. So let me just pull this up and share it on my screen. And I will drop the link in the chat as well for you guys. All right, I'm going to screen share, but you guys go ahead and click on that so you can check it out for yourself. Let's get into some real answers to this out of the abstract and into numbers. This is the Lyssna sample size calculator that members of my team worked on and built over the past, couple months. And it is awesome. I want to say clearly, I had no involvement with building this other than checking up on the progress and like seeing out of excitement and seeing how it was coming along. But this is an amazing tool for calculating your sample size. And it's going to give you, so let's just give a quick overview of it. First of all, there's a lot of additional context and deep dive material, background explainers behind not only how this was created, but what goes into these calculations, and some really good content about just sample size in general. But if we go up here to the main event, the calculator, you'll see it's pretty simple to use. Essentially, we're selecting a research method. These all correspond to the research methods and sections that you can run, study types that you can run in Lyssna. And for each of them, we're getting some different options in terms of the parameters, confidence level, margin of error, etc. So this is going to be a really good tool for establishing that baseline sample size. So let me do a preference test here. Let's say we were testing, we wanted to show two different versions of a landing page. And we wanted a confidence level of 95%. Calculate sample size, and we get our minimum, our recommended, or like optimal balance, and ideal, like how many you need for really the most statistically significant or the most confident and reliable responses here. Let's see. Let me give everyone a minute to play around with this one rather than watch me demo. Okay, I looked at the chat because I was hoping that was my reaction too, as of when I saw the final version of this. Our hard eyes here. One, so I could use it myself. Two, so now I have a tool when people ask me this question, I can send them the calculator. So let me give you guys a minute to just mess around with it. If you have any questions, drop it in the chat. I'll highlight a couple aspects of this and a couple like interesting specific things that you can use and modify with it. But take a minute to check it out. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know what you think of it. And we'll pick up in just a few. So while you guys are doing that, I want to just give a little bit more background around this. So this is, as I said, this calculator is going to give you a statistically grounded starting point. So these numbers that you're seeing here, these aren't guesses, right? These are based on real statistical principles, confidence levels, margin of error, effect size. And as I said, what I think makes it especially effective is that it maps to specific Lyssna study types here. So these are one-to-one with the studies that you're creating. So if you're running a preference test, prototype test, survey, this is going to be perfect for setting that baseline and eliminating that, let's say, like initial guesswork of how do we even start here. Check the chat. Awesome. Continue to help us democratize, strengthen our research testing process across the organization. Yeah, it is. I'm going to pass on all the positive comments about this to the team and the people responsible for building it, but I'm happy to see the reaction. So I'll tell you what my initial reaction, besides having the hard eyes emoji too, of wow, finally we have this. After I saw it for the first time and started playing around with it, I'll admit my next reaction was every study is different. I was playing around with this and trying to apply it to some example studies that I wanted to run. And I was thinking, this isn't a straightforward preference test. This card sort has follow-up questions. How do those incorporate into it? Basically, I was doing the classic, it depends, right? So I wanted to highlight that because it is true, right? This is not there are other factors and other aspects or complexities of your study or like the context around your study and what you're trying to answer with it that are going to affect this sample size. But this is going to give you a really reliable starting point. As I said, it's rooted in research, statistics. So if you're wondering, like, do I need 5 or 50 people? This answers that, right? If you're wondering do I need 50 or 500 people, this answers that too. Now, if you're getting into the weeds of do I need 50 or 55 people? Do I need 100 or 150 people for this major feature that we're launching that we have to be absolutely rock solid sure of the research behind it? That we're going to get into some of the nuance and some of the levers that come into play. But think of this as your starting point. So let's see the chat here. I have to jump another call. Baseline. Cool. When adding in additional factors and complexities. Yes, let's get into that, Andrea. So what this tool gives you is a statistically defensible starting point, right? So if you're proposing a research study and you have to bring that back to your team, if you need to have an estimate of how many people, either for a budget or a scope of a research project, this is going to be your first stop here. It can also give clarity for stakeholder conversations. Let me know in the chat if you've run into this, but because it was a common answer in the study that I sent out that stakeholder like requirements or preferences, I guess, influenced sample size. And I've never really run into this myself. I'm trying to think with like clients that I've worked with, but I have seen it in other contexts where it's like, hey, we just need to do 100 people because my boss is a numbers guy. I've heard stuff like that, right? Where it's like, we just need an impressive number of participants in this, or a number that there's going to be absolutely no denying the reliability of these results. If anyone else has run into that, it's like an arbitrary thing to factor in and has really nothing to do with statistical significance or the reliability of those results, but something that I have seen and have heard from, especially in that study here and there. If that is something that is a factor in determining sample size, is like, what's going to get my product manager to buy in and feel comfortable with these results, this is a great tool for providing that clarity. Someone other than yourself saying, hey, we don't need 500 people for this. We need 65, and anything over that is going to be so overkill, or so we're going to have diminishing returns from there. So it can be a good reference point backed in statistics and in sound research principles, let's say, to back up your claims if you're getting pushback or a stakeholder trying to influence or maybe increase that sample size. Check the chat here. I'm pretty curious about this one. Yeah, so Gareth, let me talk about the prototype fidelity one. Let me get that up on the screen. Are you talking about prototype complexity? Yeah, low fidelity, high fidelity, medium fidelity. Yeah, so what that is, I can get you a more specific answer on that, like of the actual, let's say, math behind it. But essentially what it's doing there is the same thing as a preference test with 2 options versus 4 options, right? If you have essentially with the prototype testing, whoops, hold on. Let's see. Where's my sample size calculator? There we go. Essentially with the prototype testing, and the complexity, it's factoring in the amount of like possible responses or paths for that. So if we say a high fidelity prototype, that is going to mean that let's start with a low fidelity one, right? Where it's a very simple prototype. Let's say it's a quick 3-screen flow where there are like a couple active features, a couple places you can click that are going to take you to the next screen or advance in the process. A low fidelity, relatively simple prototype is going to have less variation in the results, right? If it's only 3 screens and people can only click in 1 or 2 places where there are not that many like features or paths for them to wander off into, that is going to factor into how many people you need for that study. Let's just look at it out of curiosity. So high fidelity 16, low fidelity 10. So it's not that huge of a difference, but the idea here is with a simple low fidelity prototype, there are less possibilities for variations of answers, and that is going to require a lower sample size. Again, just like everything else in this tool, the idea is to use it as a starting point and an estimate. If we had to create a tool that could, literally factor in every single aspect of your study or clicks in your prototype, it wouldn't be a useful tool really, because it would take so long to provide that criteria. But yes, the answer to that is simple, less room for variation in responses. Just like in a preference test, if we have version 1 versus version 2, there's only 2 possible choices there, versus a 4 or 5 item preference test or with a rating or something after, where there's going to be a larger possibility for variations in responses and therefore needing a larger sample size for it. Basically, in a low fidelity prototype, there's only a few people are limited in in the functionality or what they can do. So not as much room for a wide variety of paths and clicks and journeys in that. Good question though. Let's see. Cool. All right, so let's get back to these for a sec. You guys can continue playing with the sample size calculator. So the tool gives you statistically defensible starting point, clarity for stakeholder conversations, and a very strong baseline to build from, but not 100% guaranteed reliability. And this is what we're talking about, especially with your question there, Gareth, of having other potential factors to put into this and things to consider about what you're testing, your goals, internal factors. So think of this as getting you, I don't know, I shouldn't throw numbers out here, but say 85% of the way there 90% of the way there in terms of determining your sample size, definitely helping you steer clear of any like way too low or way too high sample sizes for sure. But it doesn't know how tightly screened your participants are. It doesn't know how many research questions you were trying to answer or the impact of them. It doesn't know whether the decision that you're making is a reversible decision or a really high stakes one, like a pricing change or something like that. So it gives you the math. And then as experienced researchers, which is what we're going to get into for our last 20 minutes, it's our job to layer some judgment on top of that math. Okay, so we've got our baseline using the calculator tool. Let's talk about a couple levers, some that I just mentioned, that you can use within the or incorporate into calculating your sample size in the tool. First one is the impact of the decision. Another one that was really commonly mentioned in that study I put out there, a factor in determining sample size. How high stakes is this decision? So are you launching a core onboarding redesign? Are you changing pricing? Are you sunsetting or launching a major feature? If the impact is high and if it's a hard thing to reverse or come back on if you launch it, then there are ways to adjust for that in the calculator. You can increase that confidence level from 90, which might be good for something a little bit more exploratory or looser, to 95 or even 99%, which is going to be a really high confidence threshold. You can reduce the margin of error, say from 10% to 5%. Mainly, the bigger the risk or impact of this research and the product decisions, the tighter your tolerance is going to be for uncertainty. So if it's something that you absolutely need to get right, if it's the make or break for your career as a product designer, whether this feature succeeds or not, or make or break for your company, you're going to be able to adjust that, and mainly through confidence level and margin of error. Another lever or factor to consider in additionally when calculating sample size is exploratory, like the nature of the research. Are you exploring or doing some concept testing to get some directional insights? If so, 90% confidence might be fine. If you're doing a final A/B or this or that test, preference test, let's say, before launch, and whatever the winner is going to get pushed into production, then you might want to adjust that confidence rating to something like 95%. So early research can be directional and maybe a little bit more lax with the confidence threshold you need. And things like final validation or research that's going to lead to key product decisions might need stronger statistical backing. And then thinking about the margin of error tolerance, this is similar to the other two, but if you're doing a completion rate, right, and you want to see how many people or what percentage of people can complete a certain task, if the difference between 52% of people completing it and 48% of people completing it, if that matters, right, if that has implications on the product, business, et cetera, if that's going to have a real downstream effect, then you need tighter precision. If it's more broadly, is this working? Do people understand this? Can they get to the end of this flow without any major friction or roadblocks? Then a 10% margin might be fine. So the smaller the margin of error, the larger your sample size must be. So these are some big ones that you can adjust in the calculator. And the idea is to start with your starting point using the type of study that you're doing and the type of research that you're about to launch, getting a baseline for that sample size, and then thinking through some of these factors, right? How high stakes is the decision? Are we just exploring a new concept, or are we really trying to lock something in before launch? And how precise or tight does our margin of error need to be? Is 52 versus 48% completion rate going to be make or break for our product? Or are we just more trying to see if it's going to be 10% of people who can complete it or 90% of people who can complete it? Those are going to factor in, and those can be adjusted with the confidence and margin of error percentage. All right. Let's pause for a sec. I'm going to look at the chat here. I want to check in. How are we doing on following along here so far? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Feeling good about what I've shown you so far. Feeling confident to calculate a sample size. If not, let me know. But I want to check in because this is our baseline that we just covered here. And for the last 15, 20 minutes here, I want to expand it out a little bit and give you a couple other things to think about outside of this foundation of calculating sample size. Some other ways to think about it that I think will really have a big impact, not just on calculating sample size, but on how you look at research going forward. Thumbs up. Benjamin's chilling. Let's see. Nice. All right, good. Cool. Okay, so what we've just covered is beyond our starting point. That is the short answer, as I'll summarize in a couple minutes, but the short answer to that question, how do I calculate the amount of respondents I need for this research study? go to the calculator to set your baseline and adjust it for some of those levers that I just mentioned. Impact of the decision, nature of the study, and your, let's say, tolerance for accuracy and margin of error in it. That I could end the workshop here, and hopefully you guys would leave with the tools and understanding of the process to, if you have a study that you're ready to launch and don't know how many people to get it to, I'm hoping you could leave right now and do that more confidently than you could 45 minutes ago. From the chat, it looks like that's the case. So I want to just end our workshop by walking through something additional to layer onto that and to zoom out a little bit. So when we think about sample size, right, and getting the right sample size, this is like the reason why you guys are taking an hour out of your day to listen to me here talk about it, right? The reason is because you want to get the right sample size for your study. You want to know how many people you need to recruit to get reliable results. And the reason that you want to get that right sample size is because you want to be confident in the results of your study. You want to be able to look at what comes back, whether it's quantitative, qualitative, complex, simple study, whatever it is, you want to be able to look at that study and say, yes, we've talked to or recruited enough people for this, that these themes that we're seeing, we can act on them confidently. These are solid. So what it really comes down to, though, if we zoom out a little bit, is not just confidence in the study results. Of course, that's how we think of it, right? How many people do I need for this study to be valid? How many people do I need to convince my boss that this reflects our general audience? That's obviously are going to be our first line of thinking. But if you zoom out a little bit, it's what we're really looking for, and really the significance in it is the confidence to make good product decisions. The reason we care about the confidence and reliability of our study results is because we want to use them to build the right feature next, to improve the parts of the onboarding process that need improvement, to increase or work towards certain business goals and move the needle on those. So that's not groundbreaking stuff I'm sharing here, but just getting you to think outside of like, how many people do I need for this study, into a more broad perspective of it, which is how many people do I need to confidently make a good product decision based on this research. So I want to just walk through an example and like what I mean by this and how it might play into the way that you think about studies and sample size for conducting research. So I made this little example here, RunBuddy. Let's say RunBuddy is an app for runners and helps them train for races. And we're going to imagine that RunBuddy has a new feature, let's say a paid product or add-on in their app, an in-app purchase, let's say, of a first-time marathon training program. So this is for people who have never run a marathon before. They want to train for one, and they want to try out this feature in RunBuddy to create that plan, keep them on track. You can imagine the specifics aren't super important, but are first-time marathon training. They have a 30-day trial of it, and after that, it's paid. They get full features of it. So we're not going to consider pricing here. Really, the key for this scenario is that we have this first-time marathon training feature. It's got a 30-day free trial, and we are seeing a high churn rate, or let's say a low conversion rate to paid customers. People start the free trial to start their first-time marathon training program in the app, and in some point between then and when they have to decide to keep paying for it, they drop off or don't convert. Let's say a large number of them. So our goal, or the two teams that we're going to see here, their goals are to improve that first 30-day experience and reduce churn. Think of it as their product manager coming to them and saying, hey, we got a lot of people signing up for this 30-day free trial who want to get their first marathon training program, but only a few of them are actually paying for it after 30 days. What's happening? What should we do about this to get more people through and provide value in that 30 days that is going to lead to conversions and paid customers? So I got race appropriate teams here. Team Tortoise versus Team Hare. So let's say two teams of product people, researchers, designers who work for RunBuddy, making this into a little competition. They got the same goal to improve that 30-day trial experience and increase the conversion to paid customers or reduce the churn rate. They've got the same timeline, and most important for what we're talking about with sample size, they've got the same 100 participants, right? So setting this up as a little internal competition. And their goal is to provide recommendations, to do some research, do what they have to do to come back to their manager, their product manager, and say, here's what we recommend. Based on our research, here's what we recommend doing to turn that churn rate around and provide more value, ultimately get more people to convert from that 30-day trial into paid customers. So they've got a persona, a first-time marathon runner who's training independently. Both these teams have the same starting point, let's say. We have this kind of light, maybe too light persona here. All right, so what I want to share here is these two different approaches and how they relate to sample size. Let's say Team Hare's approach is they've got this set participant pool or sample size of 100 participants, and they do a large study. It's got maybe it's a survey asking about challenges when training for a marathon. It's got some potential features that they're sharing and asking which is more valuable. They're putting a big survey that's aimed to answer a lot of questions out to their persona, our first-time marathon runner who's training independently. They're doing the one-shot approach to this, right? That's how they're using or allocating their sample size. And if we can imagine they get these results back from those 100 participants and they discover they're overwhelmed by training, they need more motivation, they want social features. We get all of these from a big study and a big sample size. We get a lot of potential directions or insights coming out of it. Now let's look at Team Tortoise. We're going to compare these right at the end. Team Tortoise, same setup, right? And same participant pool, same fixed sample size, let's say. But instead of doing a study, launching it to those 100 participants in that persona and trying to figure everything out in one shot, they start with 10 interviews and they discover that there's a big difference between first-time or a big persona separation in first-time marathon runners. We have like true beginners who have no structured fitness history. They're overwhelmed. They fear injury. And then we have experienced athletes who have prior training background. Maybe they haven't run a marathon, but a fitness or a training routine is not new for them. So in those interviews, they're discovering, hey, wait, let's see, Sarah is not our only persona. We've got really two specific personas here that have specific needs and goals and things that we need to address if we want to keep them around after those 30 days. Now, don't worry about the specifics with this. I'm just walking you through the process here, but they learn that and they refine their audience. Maybe then their studies after that are focusing on two segments, true beginners and experienced athletes. They're able to see these two different personas in segments and how they respond and separating them in terms of their recruitment strategy and what studies they're putting out there. Maybe they do a need finding study asking like, what are some of the biggest challenges in training? They recruit 30 participants who are now beginners, 30 who are experienced athletes, and they're trying to find those friction points in those first 30 days or in their marathon training. The point here is they're taking those first 10 interviews and using it downstream to then focus who they're talking to and the focus of their studies. And then maybe for their final 30 people, they're testing some features, seeing what's most valuable, and again, keeping it segmented between people with experience and total beginners. So Team Hare, to summarize this, 100 participants, one large study, broad research goals, pain points, features, churn reasons. They've got a mixed audience. They're not segmenting. They're evaluating a lot of problems at once, and they're getting these kind of broad blended insights. Team Tortoise is got the same same participant pool, same sample size of 100 people, 10 interviews, but they're using that to refine the persona. They add a screener to segment future studies. Then they do 30 per segment for need finding. And then they're validating features with their last, let's say, 40 participants here. That's not the right math, but they're building clarity in stages on this one. So the recommendations here, what they come back to the team with, how do we fix this problem? Team Hare, their recommendations are going to be general, right? As you can imagine, adding enhanced motivational reminders, introducing social sharing features, whereas Team Tortoise is going to be a lot more specific. Number one, we have to implement and segment these people in onboarding. We have to understand right away when people sign up for this program, are they an experienced athlete who's done things with who's trained for something before, or are they totally new to a fitness routine? Because those people, as we found out, have very different needs and goals, and those are going to be important if we're trying to provide value to them in their first 30 days. I think I probably could have given you this slide right at the beginning and asked whose recommendations would you trust more? But taking what we see here from this kind of one-shot big approach to a more iterative use or allocation of sample size with Team Tortoise, whose recommendations would you feel more confident are going to achieve that goal of boosting the conversion rate, or let's say reducing the churn rate here? I just want to see turtle emojis in the chat. That's when I came back. Yeah, we know the answer, right? So what actually made the difference? They both, and coming back to sample size here, they both had this fixed number of 100 participants, did the same timeline, same statistical validity. So everything with Team Hare was sound research, let's say. It wasn't like a experience or competency issue. It's how they allocated those 100 participants, their sample size across the research. The difference was who they recruited, what they focused on, and how they sequenced those learnings. Team Hare doing it all at once, Team Tortoise incrementally targeting, refining, and solving based out of using that 100-person sample size or sample pool. So the example here, and what I'm trying to get you to think about when you're choosing sample size, is to think beyond just one study, right? Thinking about, you do want to think about that. You want to think about how many people do I need for this study, but it can be very useful to zoom out a little bit and think more about how many participants do I need, not just for this preference test, but how many participants do I need to confidently make a product decision here? And when you think about it like that, you might change how you allocate those. It gets you out of just saying, how many people do we need to recruit for this navigation test or this tree test? And it gets you in the mindset of how many people do we need to recruit to confidently pick the features that are going to increase conversion to a paid account here. And the key difference there is allocation, right? So if you're seeing you have a persona that maybe needs a little bit more refinement, or maybe is a little shaky, let's say, in terms of how well tested it is, maybe that means doing what Team Tortoise did and doing 10 interviews to really lock in that persona and then use that to create future studies from that. All about allocation here. And while I don't want to distract too much from the hard numbers and stuff that I showed you in the calculator, I do think this is a useful perspective to bring in every once in a while, to zoom out of just study type and statistical significance for a card sort, and more broadly think, and I'd say more strategically think about how we can use what we can do with a given sample size, not just to get reliable results for a study, but to make a good product decision. And that might mean spanning it or allocating those participants or that participant pool over a couple different, more focused studies. So let's finish it off here, 12:59. So how do I calculate my sample size? Start with the calculator, adjust using those initial levers that we talked through, the impact of the decision, the margin of error tolerance, and the nature of your research, exploratory versus confirmatory. Is this a concept test to see what, get a direction, or is this the final study that's going to determine what we launch with? If you can do these first two, you are already in a great position. You are not going to be far off from the absolute perfect sample size. But then also think back strategically to our Tortoise and Hare example. How do we make sure that we're including the right participants? Is there any research or anything we could do beforehand to hone that in a little bit more? Do we have clear research goals? Are we testing everything at once, or are we sequentially testing, improving those studies, and figuring out if the next focus study that's going to help give us that most important answer to progress? And finally, the word I've been using, allocation, right? Not just thinking of sample size or a participant pool as one-to-one with a study, but being able to zoom out and think, how do we, I don't want to say use these participants, but right, how do we use this 100 person or allocate this 100 person participant pool, not just to give us a statistically sound card sort, but to give us confidence in our new navigation or what feature we should launch next, that ultimate goal and that ultimate decision that's going to be made out of the research. That's all I got for you guys. So thank you for sticking with me here. Let me check the chat and see how we're doing, who's still here. See some tortoises in there. Nice. Thank you guys so much for joining. For those of you who are still here, let me know in the chat. Do you enjoy this workshop? And more importantly, do you feel more confident to choose a sample size for your next study or your next goal than you did an hour ago? Hopefully that's the case. And with a pretty, I thought, dry but important topic, I hope this gave you a couple of new ideas and a couple of things that you can put into practice with running your own studies. Most importantly, hope you can get some good use out of the sample size calculator. I'm going to share this all in the follow-up email, but we've got a promo code for 20 free credits to start testing. If this doesn't work, I'll make sure that it does right after, because I set expiration dates on them. But either way, I will share that with the recording in about an hour or so. Keep an eye out in your email for the recording. I'll put a link to the sample size calculator, the studies that we looked through here, and just about everything from this workshop, including that promo code and a feedback link to tell me what you thought about this. All right, you guys have stayed long enough. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for all the good questions and participation in the chat. Hopefully you guys are psyched enough to go get off this webinar and get into that sample size calculator tool. I'll follow up with everything from the workshop, but thanks again, everybody. Hopefully you have a great day, and we got some new workshops coming up over the next couple months, as well as planning some for the spring. So keep an eye out for that, and hopefully I will see you back here soon. All right, have a good one, everybody. See you.